anything with fractions, whether it be add, subtract, multiply, or divide, I would pick multiply because the simple rule to fractions when you multiply is simply this. You just simply multiply across. Okay. If you have 1/2 times 3/8. By the way, this is not like addition or subtraction. Addition and subtraction, rule number 1 in addition and subtraction was to write them up and down. You don't write them up and down with multiplication. No up and down. No up and down. You would just do this. And the beauty of this is to multiply, you just multiply the tops, which are called what? The math word for the tops of fractions are the numerators. That gets you your new numerator. And then you multiply the bottoms, which is called the what? Denominators. I'm the denominator. And that's your new denominator. Oh boy. Who didn't I put somebody by there? Sit next to Kara. Okay. And the one you probably won't have to deal with just yet, but eventually we will. The last thing you always do with fractions is what we call in the math world simplify, which could mean a bunch of different things, but just put the word simplify down for today. So back to this original problem here. To multiply these together, maybe next to Danny there. To multiply these numbers, you just multiply across, which means 1 times 3 gives you your new top number, and 2 times 8 gives you your new bottom number, and this is your answer, 3/16. It's a pretty simple little process there. Now, interestingly enough, I'm sorry, did I do something wrong? Yep. Yes, but we're not going to get that yet. We call that an improper fraction, and yes, that will happen a little bit later on. What's that? Yeah. And here's an interesting thought about fractions. If you're multiplying by a normal fraction, not an improper fraction, we're so used to thinking with multiplication that when we multiply things by something, we get bigger numbers. 6 times 7 is 42, or 5 times 9 is 45. When you multiply by fractions, you actually get smaller numbers. Okay. For example, if I take half times 1/4, which is the same thing as saying 1/2 of 1/4. Okay. If you take 1/2 of 1/4 or 1/2 times 1/4, okay. If you think about what you start with, starting with a half a circle, multiplying it by 1/4 of a circle. You multiply these two things together. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 4 is 8. When you multiply those two things together, you actually end up with this, a smaller thing than you started with. Which makes sense, because if I asked you the fraction 1/2, if I asked you what is 1/2 of 10, which is the same thing as 1/2 times 10, what is half of 10? You don't have to do the math, just tell me the answer, Elijah. It's 5. Or 1/4 of, well, I guess we'll do 1/2 times 20 is 10, blah, blah, blah. So when you multiply by a fraction, you end up with something smaller than you started with. Now when you divide by a fraction, believe it or not, guess what happens? Yeah. And that would be like this. Here's your case in point for that. Let's say you have 5 apples, and you divide them by 1/2. What you're asking somebody is, how many halves can you get out of 5? Well, if you have 5 apples, and your mom says, hey, those apples are too big, cut them in half so we can have more of them. You take 5 and cut it in half. How many pieces do you end up with? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 5 divided by 1/2. How many halves are in 10? Or 5? 10 of them. That's my vain attempt at an example. But for right now, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. You just have to know that when you multiply by fractions, you multiply across. And here's what the book will also do. They'll ask you this problem. What is 1/8 of 1/5? So they'll write it out in words, and you have to write it out mathematically. The key thing to remember is when you see that word of, it means to multiply. So you change this word sentence into a math sentence, and it is 1/8 of 1/5 is what? What would be 1/8 of 1/5? Laney Kabarik says, multiply across here, Laney. 1 times 1 is? And 5 times 8 is 40. 1/8 times 1/5 is 1/40. Can I see the drawing of that? This is what it would look like. 1/8 times 1/5. It's like you're starting off with a box. Here's 1. Okay, I am cutting one side. What is 1/8 of this? Well, it would be like cutting this box into 8ths. I'll show you. Here is my, and I will do this. This is 1/8, correct? I'll color it in for you. Now I am multiplying that by 1/5, which means I'm cutting this side into 5s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I am shading 1/5 of it. Well, I'm shading 1/5 of the whole box. I totally can do. In other words, I'm sorry, I am taking 1/5 of this little piece I have right here, which is right here. What is this little box? This box is 1 out of how many little boxes do I have? 40 of them. It gets a little goofy there. Yes, sir? Oh, please. Absolutely. So 1/40 is your answer. Your assignment then, children, is lesson number 76. 76.